Now we talk about whether a 5-year prison sentence for Just Stop Oil protesters is too harsh. We'd love your thoughts on this. 5 environmental activists who organised protests to bring the M25 to a standstill over 4 days have been jailed, with the judge describing them as crossing the line from concerned campaigner to fanatic. The co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, Roger Hallam, was among those imprisoned, and he's received the longest sentence, 5 years. The judge said he turned the trial into a piece of direct action protest. What do you think, Bobby? It's a big old sentence, that, 5 years.
Extreme. So our current climate emergency and biodiversity crisis is probably the biggest existential threat that we have to the planet. And of course, these people are causing inconvenience, but protest always has been. And the reality is, dissent is the foundation of liberty. For a world to operate under democratic circumstances, we need people to be able to protest peacefully, which they have done. And they've been given some of the longest sentences ever for peaceful, non-violent action. And I think part of it stems from the Tories' Draconian Act from 2022, which is the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act. And I think what this does is this tells our society, actually, one, we don't value peaceful protest, and secondly, actually, we don't care about the climate crisis and emergency. And that's what it's sending out there.
Lynn, 5 years. I think the top one. They didn't all get 5 years.
Yeah, they didn't all get 5. I do think the sentencing is a little bit harsh, but in law there's something known as the floodgates, where if they don't make an example of someone, you will have repeated offenders thinking that they can do the same. And I think... yes, like I said, I do think they should be punished. I do actually think they should have been imprisoned, because we're forgetting the damage that they actually did in terms of the blockade, the economic damage it did, the police expense that could have been. Look at how many violent crimes are occurring, and they were all pushing their resources towards them. And the biggest issue is, yes, there is a climate issue occurring. However, when it comes to the UK, we're low on the offenders list. Therefore, many people in Britain at that time were not supporting them. They did not have the backing of the public. So I feel that the judge felt that they had to do something that sent out a clear message that we cannot accept people to block our roads, block our transportation, and block the average man from getting to work.
There's a picture here of them. Yeah, these are the defendants right here. So you can see them all. And it was 5 years for Hallam on the right. The others got 4. So they were all given stiff sentences. Lynn on Facebook says it's not long enough. They should also pay the cost of the police hours that were over £1 million. Mark on Twitter says, in a prison crisis, this seems arbitrary and unnecessary. Their intentions are actually good. We may look back on this with shame. Yeah, I wonder whether... because Chris Packham said it's judicial thuggery.
I think it is. Again, if you look at the sentencing, the average sentence in the UK for people having commit violent crime is 1.7 years, drug crimes is 3.7 years, and robbery is 4 years.
And rape and child...
It's about 5.5.
Yeah,
and this is getting 4 years. So I think it's like the messaging. I think the judge here is maybe, again, trying to set the example, but I think what example he's setting...
It's high profile, that's why. The reason why is because it was everywhere, and we had people not being able to get to the hospital, ambulance were being...
It'll stop it, though, won't it? There won't be anyone doing this to the M25 again.
It will stop it.
But again, that
they
means
don't want
that
5 years in jail.
Climate change now, as a topic of discussion, seems to be snuffed out by the establishment because of this.
You think so?
I think it's been snuffed out.
I think with the Labour government, they're going to do...
Well, yeah, they cancelled their biggest green policy, didn't they? Which is to raise whatever it was.
Yeah, but there's a huge push for like wind farms and renewables.
You think it's gone, do you, Bobby?
I think this is a clever way of pushing the conversation down the line for environment. Because obviously, if you're a politician, you're thinking about, we've got to sort out schools and teachers and sort out hospitals. Climate change feels like this distant thing, climate temperature going up 0.1 a year. Oh, we can delay it for 10, 20 years. But if everyone keeps doing that, eventually our grandchildren will pay
One thing I will agree with, and I've tried to take out a level of bias for me, because I do, in terms of priorities and what I care about, climate change is very low for me personally. But when we look at the suffragette movement, when we look at civil rights, when we look at racism, we all need the ability to be able to peacefully protest. And you're right, the act that was brought in 2022 is very arbitrary, and it essentially sends out a message that we can no longer peacefully protest. However, the Palestinian marches, no one's had to experience this. They've taken positive routes. Thousands have come out. So they're not just attacking everyone.
OK. Jean is in Blackpool. Jean, what do you think? 5 years for the worst offender here?
Well, all I want to say is, when you see what happened in Leeds, and then what will they get? You're watching, it's anarchy. And I can't say...
We'll talk about Leeds later on, but we've got some footage. But there's been some unrest and things being set fire to. Yeah.
It's more than that, because I've watched programmes before, like Panorama, and a police car goes into that area, and they're absolutely surrounded by hundreds, taking mobile phone pictures of them. And nothing's really been done about that. You've got to stop that.
Is your point, Jean, that there's a lot of unrest that concerns you?
Well, the unrest is what's happened in Leeds.
Yeah, no, OK. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't cutting you off. Thank you so much, Jean, because we'll talk about that later. Yeah. It sort of started in a domestic way, the Leeds thing. We think maybe a child was taken by social workers from a Roma family, and something then was triggered in the community, whatever. Jean, thank you so much for your call. I just don't know which way this is going to go, because it's possible if you're a young climate protester, you see this guy go to prison for 5 years, they all get portraits of him in their bedrooms now. You know, he becomes a sort of spiritual leader almost.
But I also think, like, if you're now thinking about protesting, you're thinking, actually, I don't want to risk being in prison for 5 years.
Yeah,
and the reality
true.
is, protest is meant to be inconvenient. I'll give you one personal example. So I was hosting an event about the future of 2024 science and climate change. And my event was disrupted by who's the most famous climate activist in the world?
Well, we're not on Attenborough here, we're Greta
Oh,
Thunberg.
Greta.
I saw her stand up, look at me in the eye, say, and she's like, I'm going to make a protest. And obviously, it inconvenienced my event. It was not great. But if she's not there standing up for the planet, people like these protesters, who else will?
I think she got arrested as well. I don't know if it was for that, but she did.
I think she likes it. I think it does more for her brand. Oh, I'm a martyr. I'm
I mean, it might do, but what she's, again, we always get, is it target the man or the argument? Her argument is still our planet is under
Yeah, but I think it was at a time where we were experiencing loads of issues, COVID, cost of living, the average man was trying to get to work, so your sick parent was trying to get to the hospital, and we have no actual time scale. OK, when is this crisis going to happen? OK, it's gradually happening. OK, 100 years. OK, you might not be... People needed to know that they were cared about right then, and they didn't... But I mean, they weren't attached to the climate.
In life, you know, there's always this contest between the urgent and the important, and we just only ever deal with the urgent, and they're talking about the important. Derek's in Exeter. Derek, do you think this is harsh?
Good morning, Jeremy and panel. I think it is harsh. I can see both sides of the argument, to be quite honest. I think that if everybody decided to gridlock society, we'd have civil unrest and a breakdown in law and order. And if they turn the court proceedings into a circus, as alleged, then that is a contempt for the legal system, which has got to be challenged.
Yeah, the judge obviously didn't like their behaviour during the trial, so that was part of it. Yeah,
I mean, you know, we've got a right to protest, but law, you know, the rule of law has got to prevail. I think that is the case. I also think, of course, it won't serve the full sentence. I still think the sentences are too long, but it won't serve the full sentence. Hardly anybody does. Imagine if they were in China or Russia or maybe India and did the same kind of thing, how long those sentences might be there. So relatively, we're quite tolerant. But I do agree with, I think, a well-intentioned people, and it's the most important issue for us, but it's got to be dealt with in a balanced way.
Thank you, Derek. Later is the papers and everything else.